progress.
Welcome to the Blue Lake City Council meeting. Today is March 11th, 2026. City staff, will you? Oh, looks like we are not doing roll call yet. We're doing Pledge of Allegiance. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
It's the same order.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. City staff, can you go ahead and establish a quorum?
Yes. Mayor Sawatsky?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Stefani? Here. Councilmember Napier?
Here.
Councilmember Lewis Lusso?
Here.
And Councilmember Bayless?
Here.
Can we entertain a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Motion made by Stefani,
Second.
seconded by Louis Lusso. Any public comment? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none. It passes unanimously. Moving on to public comment. The public is invited to present petitions, make announcements, or provide other information to the City Council that is relevant to the scope of authority of the City of Blue Lake. Would anyone like to speak? Seeing none?
Stop by to join the landing festivities for Breeze Airways' first flight in the Humboldt County from West.
Mike Johnson.
No public comment? All right. Moving on to item number 6, presentation by Sierra on Risk Management 101 for council members. Would you, city staff, like to fill us in, or would you like to go ahead and start presenting?
Go ahead,
All right,
Eric.
we'll go right to it.
You ready?
All right, so good evening. My name is Eric Young. I'm the Deputy General Manager for CIRA, which is the California Intergovernmental Risk Authority. With me tonight is Brian Endinger, who's our Risk Manager as well. Here for moral support, answer any other questions. He actually did some training with city staff actually a couple days ago.
Yesterday.
With the Public Works Department. And so we'll talk about some of the services as part of that as we go.
Nice.
So we brought this together partly because two different things. One, we're doing a presentation actually for staff, for both all the members that are in Humboldt County. There's 6. So basically, I'll say Blue Lake, Ferndale, Trinidad, Eureka, Arcata, and Fortuna are all members of CIRA. And so we ended up doing a Risk Management 101 for them, one this morning. We're going to do another one tomorrow in Eureka. And that session was 3 hours, a little more in depth for staff on that. But we also wanted to do something a little different. And this is the first time we've actually done this for council. So you are the first ones to actually have this type of presentation. And what we found is a lot of times when we meet with councils in the past, they just may not understand what CIRA is, what the resources are, and also that we're not really insurance. It's a little bit different when we talk about risk sharing and joint powers authorities and some of the things that are equated with that. So our plan tonight is, one, provide an overview of CIRA to give you a little more background on what the program is and the coverages that the city has. We also did open this up again to other councils, so I know there's council members for Fortuna, at least I know there's one member there, and then there may be some others that join a little bit later. And so the first part's an overview, and the second part is kind of more actually the true risk management 101 when it comes to what are the exposures the city has, what type of claims, also what immunities the city has if there is a claim, and also what council can also do to help prevent claims and to give you a little more perspective on some of those things. And also give you perspective on the types of claims we're seeing. You'll hear terms of nuclear verdicts, social inflation, what used to be small claims. We would typically see our big claim was considered $2 or $3 million. Now we're seeing claims typically running 20 millions, and now they have a new term recently, thermonuclear verdicts, which are claims over $100 million. In the last year, there's been 42 claims in the United States that have been above that level against public entities. So it's not just, it's not private sector. This is what we're talking about all throughout. This is going to be public entities as we go through that. So let's start off with how did we get here? What's a Joint Powers Insurance Authority and how did it form? So this is a Time magazine cover from 1986. And basically in 1986, what you saw and experienced, if you were around during that time, is commercial carriers canceled insurance for public entities. Or if they didn't cancel, they raised their deductibles and their premiums so high, whereas if you had a police department where maybe you're paying had a $10,000 deductible, moved to $100,000, and then eventually $500,000. So each and every claim, that city would have to pay that first $500,000. And we're now seeing this come to fruition for fire departments. The commercial carriers pulled out of California for commercial, for fire departments. And so they were scrambling. We had 100 fire departments, mainly volunteers, looking for coverage because there wasn't any available. We had volunteer fire departments where they had $1 million budget, total budget, and used to pay $30,000, and then all of a sudden had to pay $90,000, right? So almost 10% of their budget was just going for those type of events there. So what happened during this time, basically, in 1976, REMIF was formed. It was actually formed before the crisis. In 1986, PARSAC was formed, which was the legacy, the original organization that helped form CIRA. And you have probably over 100 pools that were formed during this period. So CIRA is one pool, but there's probably just on municipal pools, there's probably 20 other pools that cover public entities for municipalities. There's SDRMA, Special District Risk Management Pool. There's Golden State Risk Management, which has a lot of everything. It has counties, it has mainly cemetery districts, over 150 cemetery districts as part of that. Mosquito abatement districts, vector control, you name it. They're specialized, and there's all these pools basically formed around that time. And then you look basically in the 1980s and 2010s, both PARSAC and REMIF were existing. And around 2020, we started having discussions of how we can share resources together. Just as consolidation occurs with fire departments and other areas, not a whole bunch of people were saying, I want to be a risk manager for a risk pool. And our staffs, basically, were about the same size, 4 or 5 people for each of those organizations. And so we started those discussions, and in 2021, CIRA was born as a merger between those two pools. One had 35 members, the other 15. We merged, and we had basically 50 members at that point. And then right after that, up to this point, now we've been in existence since 2021. We're now up to 60 members. And total payroll of $660 million is what we cover between those organizations. When you look at the size of those organizations, the average payroll is around $10 million. Or 11 million, it shows up on there. So what that tells you is the average city that we cover is around 50 employees. Right? So it's not a little bit small. We're not covering LA, really large cities, right? Oakland, those type of things. They're self-insuring on their own. So really what we're here for are those small organizations that may not have a full-time risk manager that need some of the assistance with that. Largest member at this point is El Segundo. They're actually not a member yet. July 1, the board approved them. They'll be joining the pool, and they have 47 million payroll, and so quite large. El Segundo is right next to LAX, to give you an idea of where their operations are. Amador City is our smallest member. They also have the distinction of being the smallest city in the state of California. Right now it shows 91,000 for their payroll. It's actually less than that because the council decided they're half FT, that the mayor was basically, and the council is going to run the city. There is no administrator for that city at this point. They're more of a tourist town, if you're not familiar with that area. And not a whole lot, and they still have the same risk as any organization, trip and falls and claims they can have against them. From a population standpoint, Rancho Cucamonga is our largest member with about 175,000 residents. That's right outside of Ontario. And then again, the smallest, again, Amador, 205 residents makes up that one. As far as our membership, 70% of our members have public safety. So police, fire, or both. And so what we typically find when it comes to public safety is up north, more of our northern members. We typically find where they'll have their own police departments as well as fire departments. But then when we look at Southern California, they mainly contract with the counties for those services. So like Rancho Cucamonga, they contract with San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, or if they're in Orange County Fire. But we typically don't see a whole bunch. I think we only have 3 police departments of our 20 members in Southern California, which we actually like. With less risk from that standpoint when we talk about some of those. And then from a membership standpoint, we're pretty evenly spread out. Up north, we have 19 members, which represents 32% of our membership. In the middle, and about 22 members there, 36%. And then south is where we've actually had some growth, and we're up to about 32% of the membership there. One thing I forgot to point out, you can stay on this side. on the commercial carriers, if you try to buy commercial coverage right now and you have a police department, the minimum deductible you can get is $5 million. Wow. Right? So the reason why pooling was created is we can actually create coverages, and as we talk about some of these options, because literally you cannot buy that coverage, or even if you could afford it, would you really want a $5 million deductible? And so pools basically can have the lower deductibles, we share risk up to a certain point, and then we can attach at those higher levels, and that way it's not one individual city absorbing some of those programs there. Under our coverage programs, what we're gonna now talk about is what the coverages are available, and as well as what the city has. So this is the general liability program, and what you're seeing on the screen there, what we call towers. So we basically build towers, and the dark layers, columns, are the deductibles that are available to members. The lowest deductible is $5,000, and we do have members that go all the way up to $1 million on deductibles. So that means each and every claim, they pay, either $5,000, $10,000, $25,000. Just like regular insurance, homeowners, whatever, car insurance, the lower your deductible, that means you're gonna pay more premium. The higher, the more risk you retain by having a higher deductible, the less premium you're paying. And what happens in the gray areas, that's where you share risk with the other members. This is, again, not insurance. Every member, basically, we have an accounting for your losses over the years. And so in that area, if Blue Lake was to have a claim, Eureka helps pay for it, Arcata, Avalon, Rancho Cucamonga. So depending on the size of the claim, the money from the other members will help pay for that claim if it exceeds the premium that the individual member contributed there. Now, above that, you see PRISM. PRISM is also a joint powers insurance authority that provides excess insurance typically. And so they provide coverage from basically from $1 million up to $4 million. So that gives us $5 million of coverage. And above that, we purchase optional excess through PRISM. And so basically the city has coverage up to $40 million per claim, right? Sounds like a lot. It used to be a lot, but unfortunately, we've seen claims now, again, from nuclear verdicts to where, to see a $20 million claim is not out of the question. The other thing on the excess that we've seen in the news, sexual abuse and molestation claims. So they're called SAM claims. LA County, $3 billion settlement for sexual abuse and molestation claims. And so that's what's driving the cost of insurance for public entities. We also have dangerous condition claims. We'll show some of the stats on that a little bit later of what the costs that we've experienced on some of those claims on there. So on the general liability side, as a pool, we're actually doing really good. We typically see our pool rates maybe flat. Last year, the year before, we actually had about a 0.1% decrease on there. Something going on there. And so, but on the excess, we've seen 25% increases year over year for that layer from basically 1 million up to the 40 million. So it's been quite expensive for that. Well, and then up in the corner it says George GH, that's George Hills, which is our pool. They're a TPA, third-party administrator. So whenever the city has a claim, basically it gets referred to George Hills. They act as the adjusters. They'll give advice to the city staff on whether the claim should be accepted or rejected. And within government code, there's certain government claims code that if it's late reported, they have a certain time frame. Did they report all the information that's required? And so it can be rejected based upon certain issues being there. If the city rejects the claim, let's say it's a trip and fall, right? And someone says, no, I want my money, right? They can sue. And at that point, if they do decide to actually sue the city, then we'll assign defense counsel. And we have a panel of attorneys that specialize in different areas. So we have panel attorneys that deal with dangerous conditions, sidewalk, trip and falls, that, as well as for those with law enforcement, we have specific attorneys that will defend those cities with law enforcement, as well as the officers, right? So when those type of claims happen, if you get named personally in a lawsuit, we also defend that part of it as well. Right, next one, as far as covered events, who's covered or what's type of coverage? So auto liability, public officials, errors and omissions. So this covers the actions of counsel if there was a lawsuit presented on that. Personal bodily injury, So obviously, someone trips and falls, that's where the bodily injury part comes in, as well as then property damage. If somehow, a vehicle backed into another person's vehicle, we backed into a fence, those type of things, there would potentially be coverage for those type of events. The covered individuals, obviously the employees, and when they're acting in the course and scope of employment. You as council are also covered under the policy. Volunteers, so if you have volunteers doing traffic control for an event or some other type of thing, and if something happens, they direct someone and the person backs into another vehicle, the volunteers would be covered, so they wouldn't necessarily be sued individually. There'd be coverage for the volunteers there. And then boards or commissions, so your planning commission, any commissions or the committees that are basically appointed by the board also have coverage under the policy. And the last one's additional covered parties required by contract. So as an example, the city contracts with the county for services, right, for law enforcement services. As part of that, they require that to be additionally insured, and so they have coverage under the policy as well. Right? And so anytime you rent a facility, things like that, then we add them essentially to that policy. All right, go to the next one there. So we act, again, like an insurance, but we're not insurance. And the coverages that you see on here are basically those coverages that were determined by the board of directors of CIRA. I think Jenny, you're going to serve on the board, I think, if I'm correct, in her role. But essentially, every member has a vote on the board, right? So Amador, with their not even one FTE, they get the same vote as Rancho Cucamonga with a very large city, right? And then as part of that, with our memorandum of coverage, the council, the board decides what's going to be covered, what's not covered. So they basically write the policy. An example, fairly recently, and up here, the city of Eureka started offering mental health professionals to go out with their police officers, right, as part of their homeless outreach and some of those type of services. Well, under the medical or healthcare operations, that was excluded. That's technically considered providing healthcare. And so they actually approached us, went to the board, and that actually got changed. Now there's an exception for providing those type of services. So where there might be no coverage, a member can go back saying, hey, we got this situation, and basically go to the board and request some type of coverage or endorsement on those things. Most of the coverage you see on there are coverages that are because there's other insurance they can purchase. So not everyone has airports and dams, so that's unique. That the pool shouldn't be dealing with that coverage, and so we have the members purchase that on their own. Other coverages like employee benefit plans, employee injuries, that's health benefits, workers' comp, again, different coverage there. Breach of contract and land use regulations. Basically, those are considered to be intentional acts, meaning the council voted to zone a certain area, right? Land use, zoning, those type of things, approve a development. Because that was an act of council, there's not coverage for the decision on something like that. And usually people sue for injunctive relief, that they don't want it. There's not any damages that they're suing for. And so that's another reason why it wouldn't be covered there. Fixed transit, right? Again, buses present unique risks that are quite different than normal municipal operations. And then disability accommodations, I'll cover that one. That's basically ADA. We cover the defense of an ADA claim. So if someone says they don't have access, they sue the city for that. We'll defend the city for the ADA claim. That just refers to we don't pay for the expenses to put in the ramp. That would still be on the city to basically do those type of activities on that. The other thing, note, the way insurance typically works is it's covered, everything's covered unless it's excluded. So in your insurance policy, if you look on your normal insurance policy, it says you have all this coverage for bodily injury or property, whatever, but then it starts saying, except for this, this, and this. And what's get carved out, one of the most recent exclusions under commercial policies was communicable diseases. What happened? COVID. So all of a sudden they go, oh, that wasn't on our list. Let's go. So the policies, when they renewed, they basically excluded that coverage. We also added some language in there as well because it's more of an act of God kind of thing for those type of stuff. All right, we'll go on to the next one there. So it says general liability, but this next one's employment practices liability. You see that one underneath. And this refers to the right-hand side of the tower there, the blue and the green colors. Same type of deductible, but in this case, what IRMA provides coverage for, Employment Risk Management Authority, is for claims of bullying, sexual harassment, retaliation, anything employment related, wrongful termination, those type of things would be covered under that. We have a separate JPA for that because they specialize in that. We have specialized investigators as well as defense attorneys. We don't necessarily want someone handling a trip and fall claim, handling basically employment practices. And so that's where we have that unique coverage. And again, the same type of thing, there's coverage up to $40 million for those type of claims. And the next one there. As part of the employment practices coverage, IRMA provides additional resources. Some of those are live, basically either on-site or webinar training, and they do employment practices liability. They will come out, even all the way up here to Blue Lake, to do trainings with you, employees. Usually what they just ask is if you have any neighboring members, that they also be allowed to be invited to participate in the training. Because of COVID, that's been more online type things, but AB 1825 training, all those type of things, but they have a list of about 10 standard courses that they offer each year. They rotate them, and then those are available that any member can basically request to have that training conducted at their location. There's also employment protection line, so whistleblower hotline, that's available as well. So if anonymous complaints, employees have access to that. Employment advice attorney hotline. This is also through PRISM, through our coverage. If your city manager has a question about, hey, we have a situation, we're not sure what we should do, or if the HR type person, they can call. It's an employment attorney and basically ask questions and say, hey, this is a situation, can you give me advice? And that's free as well. The goal of this is to not have claims. So we're going to try to get as much information to those that need it, to the staff, when that happens. There's also an annual training grant of grant that's $2,500 that they provide. So this is available to every member, and it can be used for anything employment practices related. Attending the Cal Palra conference for HR professionals, having an attorney come in, review your policy manual, those type of things can all be uses. It just has to be dedicated towards that. It is a use it or lose it. So we always push everyone to, it's free money, $2,500, and it resets every July 1. So if you haven't used it, we encourage you to do that. There's also the LCW Consortium. So again, staff as well as council could even attend some of these trainings. These are regional trainings conducted by Liebert Cassidy Whitmore. LCW is a employment law attorney. They only practice for public entities. That's their entire focus, is public entities. And they have 5 offices throughout the state, and they'll do regional trainings, and there's a consortium offering that's done on almost on a monthly basis, has different topics. Your staff, supervisors, managers, so they can get training that they may not have an opportunity otherwise, that they can attend, how to be a better supervisor, how to do evaluations, all those type of things are topics that are conducted as part of that. All right, and then we'll go to the next, workers' comp. So workers' compensation, this one's pretty more straightforward because it's all basically as far as what the requirements are developed by the state, right? There's not a wiggle room as what's covered, what's not covered. If an employee is injured on the job, they're covered under workman's comp on that. And again, same type of thing. We have deductibles from $5,000, in this case all the way up to $500,000. And the claim, there is no cap on workers' comp. Claims can go on for 30 plus years. Basically, once you have a work comp claim, if the person wants to, and they have future medical, basically they'll have coverage until they pass away, right? And so that's part of some of the coverage there. LWP is our claims administrator. So just like George Hills on the general liability, they handle all the claims, and the adjuster basically works with city staff, return to work, all those type of things to be able to provide coverage. And once the $5,000 is paid, then CIRA basically pays the balance there. I should have brought up, so Blue Lake, $5,000 deductible for all coverages, right? We have the lowest deductible amount. Some of the other members, I want to say like Fortuna, I know is on the call. I believe theirs is $10,000. Eureka, theirs is $100,000 deductible, right? So there's all different ranges depending on what member, what agency those belong to. Okay, and the next slide there. So on the work comp program, a couple things to note on here. We're a little bit different than some other pools that our adjusters are dedicated solely to, you have one adjuster for the city, and that adjuster handles the claims from the very beginning all the way to the end, medical only, indemnity, and future medical. Basically, you can have, what that means is a medical only, they need treatment, there's no lost time. And indemnity means they actually lost time from work. And a lot of times a future medical is they were rated, they have a permanent disability, and they get future medical for the rest of their life. So they can, typical one I'll use for law enforcement, hearing aids. At some point, being at the range, they require hearing aids. Every 5 years, they're gonna get new batteries, essentially, so that claim's gonna stay open. Or someone has a back injury, at some point, they may need surgery. It could be 10 years down the road, and then that adjuster's gonna handle that person throughout there. They may have multiple claims, but then they know the whole history of that individual, that injured worker. The one thing that's also different is, you'll see on there, it's CNR, compromise and release. So traditionally, most public agencies, when someone gets injured and they have an option, it's called a stipulated award. And a little technical here, but the idea behind this is an employee gets injured, we'll stipulate that they are permanently disabled a certain percentage. The doctor really determines all this. We're based on what the doctor's reports are. And then they'll say they also get future medical. And that's typically how it works, and we don't close those claims. We don't offer CNR in most cases until the employee retires or they leave employment of the city, because the concern is always, well, what if they have another injury? There's been enough studies to find if someone's gonna have a claim, it doesn't matter whether you STIP or you do a CNR. And so we've taken what's called a CNR first approach to basically close out the claims for good. And so we buy out their future medical. So if we determine, okay, right now the medical is $10,000, we know with inflation it's probably gonna be 20 or 30 by the time 30 years later, we can buy out their future medical for $10,000. That claim's closed, and there's no more liability to the city or CIRA, and they can treat with any doctor. So that's the other part. As long as they're in the system with future medical, they have to treat within the work comp system. We do have other members where a person retires, they move to Tennessee, and they have a claim, and they need to see a doctor. Guess what they have to do? Fly back to California. Right? Unless they can find a doctor that will accept workers' comp in that state, California workers' comp. So that doctor would have to agree to accept the medical payments and all those type of things. So you typically don't find that often. And so that's an opportunity, again, for us to close out those claims. And then the last one, proactive injury prevention, that's where Brian comes into play, and Thor. We are very active in coming out to the members, helping with training, and our goal is to reduce injuries. We have forums. We've done a public works forum the year before, focused on back injury prevention, those type of things. We work with police. We're doing the same thing, and really trying to minimize workplace injuries as much as we can, as well as return to work. All right. Other programs, this one definitely go a lot quicker. Property, so we have a group purchase property program. Commercial property is not impacted like homeowner insurance is. Completely different. And it's also, in this case, we have all risk coverage. The cost of coverage typically for a building, a city building, is 30 cents for every $100 of value. Right? So kind of doing the math, 100,000 at 30 cents, you're paying essentially about $300 for coverage for $100,000. And it's full replacement value. So it does have a $25,000 deductible on that. And then also we have, for autos, we cover the autos and all those type of things. So if a building was damaged, windstorm, whatever, then we would basically have coverage for that property as long as it's on the city's schedule. And so we review that every year with staff on there. Fidelity bond program, basically crime, that's protection against employee theft and fraud. So it does happen, probably about every 3 years we get a claim from some member or someone in the state where basically there's employee theft, embezzlement, and those type of things. More in Southern California is where we see it, but you typically see news stories, and that would basically replace any type of lost monies due to that. And then also covers the bond for those employees that are required to be bonded, right? Under certain finance employees, those are required to have a bond. This provides the bond for those employees as well. And it's relatively inexpensive coverage. Cyber, Unfortunately, the world we live in now, we need cyber coverage. And with Ukraine in the beginning, we saw less claims, but it's been back on the uptick where we're starting to see cyber attacks, probably at least one a month of a member, or at least they're trying to infiltrate. And so that covers breach response, covers the attorneys, it covers a ransom negotiator, all those type of things, as well as potential any ransom payments that might be part of that. And it covers up to $2 million. So quite a bit. And then the other coverages, pollution, earthquake, deadly weapon, chief executive, those are just other coverages. They're much smaller, not used that often on there. Financial overview. I'm gonna kind of keep this a little more. No, you got it, you're perfect. Is looking at how do we collect your payments? How do we determine how much the city pays, right? And so the first part is an actuarial study. So every year we have actuaries that look at the losses of the members and say, okay, over the last 5 years, what were the losses? And they also take a look at the payroll. And for an actuaries, basically, it's a big stats regression analysis, and they say, okay, based upon this is what the rate should be for every $100 of payroll. And they look at it historically and then move that forward and project out based upon inflation and those type of things, and determine, did they get it right when they did the study. So they determine essentially what is our ultimate loss that they expect, and they go what's called expected, and then they inflate it to with an 80% confidence level so that they're basically right 8 out of 10 years, because half the time they're wrong. Actuaries with crystal balls, they kind of go, yeah, maybe this and that, but that's basically how they work. As part of that funding component, what they look at, so they look at what the pool layer, what are our losses as a pool of our members, and then they're going to throw in there the general claims expense. So that's our TPAs as well as staff of CERT. I'll let you know good news on the general administration. Our administrative cost is 3%. A lot of other pools are 10 or 12%. We're very lean. We have 9 staff. I think we're adding one more. We're going to be up to 10, but we're still going to be right in that 3% range overall. And we're also public employees. We are just like staff. We're Joint Powers Insurance Authority, but we are government employees. So general claims expense, that gets thrown in there. And then the other piece of that is the excess insurance. I mentioned excess insurance has been going up quite a bit per year, especially on the general liability side. 5 years ago, right when we started CERT, we were paying $9 million in excess for excess coverage for that $40 million of coverage. Our projections this year is $26 million for that same coverage, right? So it's more than doubled in that short amount of time, and that's due to those verdicts and everything that I talked about. Workers' comp excess, not as bad. But essentially, what we'd like to say, that determines how big of the pie we're going to have for each of the programs. And then ultimately, for Blue Lake and Fortuna, you're going to have a slice of the pie, right? And how big that slice is going to be is based upon your payroll, right? So if you have more payroll, you get a bigger slice because that's exposure. That's how much you're exposed on there. But then we start with that slice, and then we're going to say, okay, can we nibble a little bit off potentially? And so we look at your deductible. So based upon your deductible, the higher your deductible, then we kind of say, okay, there's less money you're going to have to pay, and then others may take that up. Your loss experience will be part of that, or your loss history, because we look at years past, which really goes in the last one, which is an XMOD factor, experience modification. And when we do that, the actuaries calculate this number, and it shows 1 is the pool average. So 1 is comparing all the members, 1 is the average, and that becomes a multiplier. So this is where you're either really going to grow or go really small. So if you had a 1.5 XMOD, that basically means you're going to pay 50% more than the average member of your base rate. If you have a 0.5 XMOD, you're going to pay 50% less on there. I didn't look at Fortuna's. I know for at this point for general liability, I want to say Blue Lake's about 1.3. So right now, you're about 30% more than average. And I'm going to go, well, but we're small. How can that be the case? The problem is because your payroll is so small, on these it has more of an impact based upon your size because of the payroll being small. Whereas a larger member, if they have a $300,000 deductible, their XMOD's actually be lower, even though they have the same amount of claims, right? Because they have more payroll to spread it out. All right, next one there. All right, some of the risk control programs and services. So this is really all the things that we try to provide to the members. So we'll do an annual risk assessment. So besides seeing Brian doing training, most likely at some point, either Brian or Thor will come up and they'll do a risk assessment. They'll do a follow-up on that. And basically what we're looking at is the complete operations of the city. You know, your personnel manual, looking at the training records, the bike, the bike park, all those type of things. What's going on? Is there something that we can do to make sure that there's not going to be claims? Is there something that hasn't been addressed on there? We also look at your contracts. The contracts from an insurance standpoint. Did we transfer risk effectively? So we have a comprehensive look. It's red, yellow, green kind of thing in the back that kind of says, okay, what areas are we doing good at? What areas do we need improvement on? And then we develop a plan to help and work with the city to do that. What's different as well is we don't just say, here's your report and say, see you later, good luck. We understand cities don't have a lot of staff, and so we will basically be an extension of staff when it comes to things like that. An example, we have a city down south, they haven't had a risk manager for a year. I am serving as their risk manager, right? Don't get extra pay for that job, but I'm in their DocuSign steps. So I basically review the contracts, I'm making sure the insurance requirements are being met until they fill that position, right? I've heard 3 more months. But you'd be actually, for this city, they're fairly large. They have lots of, 3 contracts a day I'm having to review. So lots of things, but that's, again, the type of service that we provide that's a little different. Sierra TV Remote Training Manager, so you have access to Vector Solutions, which is online training. You can do that, AB 1825 trainings there. We have an enterprise license, so we can actually go into your instance and actually push out training to staff as needed. We can help develop, track, all that type of stuff as part of that. We have a whole library of best practices when it comes to sidewalk maintenance, playground inspections, you name it, OSHA type stuff. We have a whole library of those, and that's all on the website that's available. It's not behind a firewall that members have access to. Contract review, 30% of our time at this point is spending reviewing contracts, right? We look at the insurance requirements, the indemnification language, because essentially what we're trying to do is if we can transfer risk to whoever's doing the work for you. This part, I have a small presentation at the end talking about contractual risk transfer. But the reality is when someone's doing work for you, they should be the ones owning the risk. They buy insurance, it's included part of the cost of doing business. And if they're the ones that caused the injury or caused the damage to be, they should be the ones paying for it. What happens in lawsuits is that, unfortunately, someone's gonna sue them and they're gonna sue the city. They're gonna sue anyone they can, right? That's what the attorneys do. That's the practice that they've done. And so the language we have in there can basically require them to defend, and basically we can tender the claims completely to whoever we do business with. Grant programs, we have dollars. We mentioned the IRMA grant. There's also $3,500 a year that's provided through Sierra, which rolls over to $7,000. And then also for the Legacy PARSAC members, there's dividends issued, and at some point, I can't remember, there's some money still left into what's called flexible spending account on there. Again, we mentioned regional training workshops. We have a police chiefs forum, fire chiefs academy, and then special events programs. So this really comes into play, not really special event, but let's say someone wants to rent the skating rink, right? They're gonna have a party, they need insurance. They can purchase special events coverage. Similar to like weddings. If someone was to rent a facility to have a wedding, they need insurance. This basically provides that. A lot of times it's only like $85, $90 for that insurance and provides $1 million of coverage. Or if they have homeowners insurance, a lot of times they may cover it as well. They just need to request an endorsement, and that can be. If the city's gonna host an event, you can also purchase special event coverage, which again, we highly recommend for certain activities. Many years ago, I think there's a reggae festival that occurred, and so we worked with the city manager at that time to basically make sure that you had coverage, because that was a unique operation, and then also make sure all the vendors that wanted to do that, they had all the coverage they required as well. And then from a technology standpoint, we provide lots of different services. I know you guys are using WaiverSign for the skate rink, so when people Do electronic waiver, that's waiver sign, that's no cost we provide to the city, and allows you to track, who's actually completed the waivers to basically roller skate. Vector Solutions, LCW, again, and this is where we really work with city staff on making sure you're utilizing the services that are available. And again, all these are offered at no cost. It's more of, does staff have the ability to take some of these on? And we try to make them as turnkey as possible when we provide those various services. All right, and I think, and then last, Joel, I already talked about the grants that are available. There is one that I will mention as well, the Prism Property Grant. So if there's properties, and this, actually, I'm trying to think, is the power plant, is that on the property schedule?
I think it is, yeah.
Even though I don't know how much value there is there at this point. But you can get, if you want to put like cameras or do other stuff, Prism has a matching grant up to $25,000. So any type of improvements that are done by the city, you can request a matching grant for some of those type of things. Even if it was already done, we may be able to request a matching grant for some of those type of things. And it can be cameras, it can be other type of stuff, deterrence. The whole goal is to prevent property damage from occurring to where the city would have to pay. All right, so that's the overview on that part. I'll kind of break if there's any questions, whether it be online or any other types of things from a coverage or resources, and then we'll get into the risk management 101.
I'm going to check in with our online people first.
Oh.
Does anyone wish to ask a question?
Are they still?
Participant, click on. Okay. No questions from our remote users?
Okay.
Okay, bringing it back to council. Does council have any questions? I'll go right to left.
Thanks. Right, great presentation.
Great.
Thank you. When you were talking about the XMOD factor and talking about the payroll and having small payroll size and the payroll dollars, is that just payroll dollars or payroll dollars per employee?
It's based upon your just payroll dollar. It's not, it includes benefits, so it's what we call DE9. So it's very much just, the idea of payroll is it's your exposure, the person's working, therefore there's an exposure to injury or those type of things. So it's direct payroll. Overall, regardless whether part-time, full-time, whatever's included in it, including overtime. So their overtime payroll would also be included in that if they're working.
But it's just a flat, just solely looks at the amount of dollars spent on payroll. Number of persons, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, and when it comes to general liability, kind of go, why does payroll have an impact on whether we're gonna have a trip and fall claim, right? But that's what's been traditionally used by everyone. There's not really a good way. If you're in the retail environment, it might be sales or, volume, like a grocery store, it's gonna be different. But for public entities, the standard exposure basis is payroll. Yeah. Question?
Any other questions? Michelle?
No, this is great.
I've got a couple questions for
Okay,
you.
good.
Are we employees of the city, like as council members?
Technically, you are, yes.
Are we covered, like, as employees by SEER, or is it a totally different?
So when
allocation?
you are, okay, a couple different things. So from a work comp perspective, if you, as you're part of a council meeting and you're doing your duties under that role and you get injured, you'd be covered under workman's comp.
Okay,
Okay, so you are treated, and depending on compensation, so those cities where they compensate, that is reported in the payroll. Not many members do that, but that would be, so you're kind of more volunteer. So also that's the other, actually great point, because volunteers are also covered under workman's comp. So if they're volunteering, we're not collecting any payroll, but if they had an injury, we cover them and largely do because it's exclusive remedy. By covering a volunteer in that way, they can't sue the city, which means they can sue for millions of dollars. When you're covered under workman's comp, that is your only remedy for the pay for claims, right? So they're not gonna be able to go outside of that.
great. Can we have, like, you said you review contracts. Is that the same thing as like our attorney reviewing contracts? Can we have you guys do it instead of our attorney or in conjunction, or?
So we look at different things. So when I look at it, generally, I'm looking at the insurance requirements and did they give you the right endorsements? Are you getting the right coverage? So I'm looking at a specific element for it. I do look at indemnification language, but we typically defer to the city attorney. What I would say is most contracts, if you have a standard template like indemnification, and as long as that's not being requested to change, you're probably fine. I know a lot of cities, they don't necessarily have every single contract looked at. It really just depends on if it's a new contract, new language. But typically from a service standpoint, there's usually a template and you're just changing the scope of services, right? And what you're paying on those type of things.
Do you offer free security audits for IT infrastructure? Is that part of any services you offer?
So say it one more time for what kind of?
I work for a school district, and
Okay.
our insurance provider will provide like free audits of of our networking systems and stuff like that. Is that something you guys offer?
So
as
you're
well?
talking IT networks?
Yes, IT networks.
No, unfortunately. So we don't have that now. Yes, so there is through Beasley, which provides a cyber coverage. There are some things, a lot of free kind of things where they can help with that. So I'm happy to talk offline and see where we might be able to find some of those. And there's still a lot of federal programs, CISA and some of the other type of things, that provide network penetration, all those type of things where they basically try to break your system. So they do that. And then as part of the cyber coverage, your IT third party, the network providers, they should be validating that you have endpoint, a whole bunch of things. Even to get coverage, you have to have certain minimum requirements now that weren't around 5 years ago.
And last question.
Yeah.
At one point, I had some questions for insurance purposes. Would I be reaching out to you guys about those questions? This was a time where we didn't have a full-on city manager.
Okay.
Is that appropriate for me to reach out to you guys if I did have questions about
Yeah.
things? Okay.
Yeah, and usually, from, obviously, we work more with, city staff and those type of things. I would just ask to include staff on it, and then, so we can make sure that we provide the right information as far as what's actually being requested. But if you have a contract, again, more from an insurance standpoint, we're more than happy to review that, to give advice on those type of things. I will say that, one of the challenges that even though public may will talk about is the Humboldt County is very unique in their contracts they're doing with the cities and the county. They're the only county in the state of California that's requiring the cities to indemnify them for their services. No, of all the other counties, no one is doing that. If that was, San Bernardino Sheriff, all those type of things, because of all the contracts they have, it would blow up the entire insurance kind of community because no one's priced the exposure of what the potential is for an organization you have no supervision over. Right? If you're an own police department, you supervise, you have control, you can discipline, you can do that. You can't do that, and that yet you're taking on the risk of what they may be doing. And so that's one of the concerns that we brought up, in the past with some of the contracts. We worked through it. We worked with county council. We worked with the folks and try to get the best language we can, and work with our coverage council as well on making sure that we have language to protect the city as well as the pool.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I do have a question. Oh, go ahead. If you have a question.
So as far as the county law enforcement contract, so you're saying there were some changes to that indemnity language that makes it more acceptable to CIRA?
Well, we had language inserted specifically in the endorsement that basically, what our argument, and we have legal trail, that basically, except for the sole or active negligence of the city, right, or of the way it's written, there's typically indemnification that we're required to indemnify except for their sole or active negligence. Our argument is that any claim that would be presented on a law enforcement claim, we would deny based upon that's their sole and active negligence. The city has no part in supervising. The city has no part in directing who is assigned. The city has no part in the training. So therefore, any claim presented would be on their sole and active negligence. And so that's the language for our coverage council. We're basically hanging our hat on. It's never been tested, but we would basically deny any claim in which they would assert that the city should pay or indemnify based upon that, because unless the city manager directed the person to arrest the person, there's no active negligence on the part of the city.
Gotcha, thank you.
I did have a question about the training. So you said trainings were available. Would those usually be set up like for a whole city, or is it possible for individual council members or to be able to look at that training if they wanted
Absolutely.
to know more?
So one of the trainings, if you want it set up to where it's just you, then they would probably That's where that training, that $2,500 grant, that would cover essentially one of the attorneys are a little expensive, right? But they'll come out and include all that, and they'll do the training specifically just with the city. But yeah, we do try as much as we can, try to, bring others in, but if there's something you wanted, and it's like, hey, we just want us, that's absolutely. that
And
can
you
be
said
done.
there were some online, like kind of video training?
Yeah, so there's online, so the Vector Solutions, that's more recorded training, but then through the consortium, there's other trainings that they're doing on a regular basis that you can attend. I'm not sure who at the city gets actually the consortium
I get
emails.
emails every day.
So, but the
If you guys
consortium
have things
emails,
you're interested in, just
and
let
so
me know.
basically, yeah, and, Jenny can send those out and basically say, here's here's the trainings, and it's open to basically any employee of the cities. Yeah.
Great.
Yep.
Does staff have any questions?
My only question is on the $2,500 IRMA grant, does that roll over on July 1st as well?
So those are use it or lose it.
No,
So
I know,
that's-
but is the date calendar or
It's,
fiscal?
it's June 30th.
Okay,
Yeah. So as long as you've encumbered it,
okay.
right? But yeah, so we always try to push, let's get, because then you'll get another 2,500 the next July.
I'm gonna check in with our remote guests, like one more time. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Seeing none, okay.
All right, so we'll go on to part 2 here.
Sorry,
Oh, yeah.
Councilmember Nicky
Yeah, yeah.
has one more
Thank
question.
you, and I apologize if I've
Yeah.
gotten this confused. There was the LCW, is that the Liebert Library?
Liebert Cassidy Whitmore.
Okay.
So there's an LCW consortium, and then there's also on the screen it had Liebert Library.
Okay,
Okay, so what the Liebert Library is it's basically, and they deal with public entities, they have like a whole personnel manual, they have sample policies, they have, if you wanted to basically start from scratch, blue language, option A, option B, which one do you want to go with? And you can basically build your entire personnel manual using what they provide.
okay, so they'll have like best practices in
Yep.
there, they have.
And then
samples.
every year, every March, actually, so actually they probably came up with the next version. They'll update it with any new laws from the prior year. And so they'll update it with all the current regulations that are part of that. And so that way you get the most up to date. And then once you have it, then they'll just say, okay, here's the new policies we recommend, that you take a look at and see if you need to change because of the change in the law or regulation.
And then just to be clear, so obviously we have it posted there on the library, we can look at it, we can access it, we can build our own personnel policy.
Mm-hmm.
And then you guys review that before it becomes implemented to make sure it's
So
covered?
the actual implementation, we request a employment law attorney review it. Rather, I don't have that expertise, but typically they can, and that's again where the IRMA money can be used for, is to have one of them review it. And typically, if it's their language and you're not modifying their language other than saying A or option A or B, there's not gonna be much that they're gonna need to review.
And then final question on that, how would we access, like any person? just
So the
go
Liebert
online?
Library, typically, we have staff, we have access, but if there's a certain area, we usually will be the ones accessing, we'll send whatever the information is. And if you want everything, we can basically, like you said, typically what I do is I'll send the whole personnel manual. That way, and it annotated, you can go, has a table of contents, and you can say, okay, what things do we need to look at? And then you can also purchase, Brown Act stuff. They have a bunch of other stuff that's more workbooks.
And do you have for fiscal policy as well?
Not physical. No, they don't. They don't go into that part.
Thank you.
Yeah. Not that we're. All right. So let's talk about risk management now. So we kind of gave the services, and this is kind of the nuts and bolts of what we deal with on a daily basis. And kind of give you an idea of how you manage risk, how the city, how staff manages risk. So first part is kind of define, risk management. Just to, I don't know if anyone, Seinfeld, I don't know when, okay, you know which part I'm talking about. There's an area where he talks about, becomes a risk manager and basically describes, Costanza, basically saying, here's what it is. That's one of the great things in describing, what risk management is. But basically, process of planning, organizing, leading, controlling activities to minimize the adverse effect of accidental losses. That's the traditional view of risk management. It's about accidental losses, preventing essentially insurance claims. That's kind of the approach there. And also planning for negative consequences and putting controls in place to minimize activity. So we put cameras out on areas to hopefully deter, right, from those things, or if something does happen, then we can catch them and we, do stuff like that. Sidewalks, we grind sidewalks down to make sure that people don't trip and fall. We do inspections. All those things are trying to minimize actually having claims that go with it. So identify the exposures that may cause a loss. We're going to talk about municipal exposures a little bit later, of what are the most common that you're dealing with there. And our goal is prevent losses from occurring. Again, minimize adverse effects. So that's the risk control part. The other piece is the risk financing is then you have to pay if something goes wrong. And so that's paying for the losses. Now, on the next slide there, it's going to talk about a paradigm shift. I had a great boss. I worked at University of California. And so she had the term that insurance is a fund for failure. And you think about it, the whole point of why you have insurance is because something went wrong. So what if we turn it and let's try not to have failure, right? If we think about all those dollars that we pay for insurance with our homeowners, auto, all that type of stuff, we pay all this money and we've had all these good years, but if we're doing good, we don't have losses. Imagine all that money we paid over the last 10, 20, 30 years. It's a lot of money, right? But it lets us sleep. So our goal, as much as we can, is try to reduce that. Now, another term within risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. Again, kind of philosophical here on you, but the reason why I put that on there is when you think about risk, it's about uncertainty. How much data do you have when you make a decision? And risk is all about making decisions. Did you make the right decision? How much data do you have that you feel comfortable making that decision? Going to Vegas, that's all about risk. It's all about probabilities, right? If someone is a card counter, right, and they're more certain that what the next card is going to be, right? They can bet more. They can take more risk because there's less uncertainty there. It's the same type of thing. So our goal as we do this is provide as much data as possible. What can we do better? How can we improve our programs to reduce the possibility of having someone trip and fall or have injuries and those type of things? And then one of the things I use the term objective-based risk management. Insurance is event-based. So when trips and falls, we pay a claim. Objective-based is more about your mission and the organization. Our goal is to help support the mission of the city. So if the mission is the bike park, all those type of things, what's preventing the city from being able to implement the different projects you have in mind? A lot of times, obviously, it's money, but I want you to think about it from the standpoint of if we're spending money on failure, that means we can't spend the money on the projects we want to work on. And so that's kind of the impetus there. And then the other part is risk management is not just about insurable risk, it's also about non-insurable risk. Your reputation, right? If something bad happens, good place to work, all those type of things, that's part of that aspect of it. If someone gets injured, yes, there's workers' comp to cover the claim, but what about operations? You're a person short, and now you have overtime to operate the water treatment plant. All those type of things deal with operational risk. You can't buy insurance for being a person short, right? There's no coverage. So it's all those things that are part of that as well.
I see, do we want to wait for questions? I see Alex Stillman has a hand up.
No, absolutely. Let's go and do it as they do it.
Oh, thank you. Well, I was listening to you talk about grinding sidewalks down and so forth. I am on the Arcata City Council, and I was walking back the other night, and I actually tripped over a sidewalk that happens to be raised because of roots, but I wasn't doing it because I wasn't on council business. So when that happens, what happens to the individual? I didn't do anything. I told the city that they really needed to look at that. And the residents in the neighborhood said, yes, that happens a lot and it's dangerous. So.
Perfect segue. So we're going to talk about that, and it kind of goes to notice and when and what presents a claim and how do we deal with some of that. So the types of risk, I'm just going to briefly go through this, but there's several types of risk. We talked about some of them. Hazard risk, that's insurable. That's, again, injuries to people, those type of things, workplace, liability towards. Financial risk, that's dealing with your finance, your accounting, right? Are people paying their bills to basically, so the city has enough money to make payroll and those type of things. The investments that the city does will be part of that. Operational risk, again, can be supply chain. Do you have enough employees to work to do the jobs that you need them to do? Would be an operational risk. Or even in in some areas, right, are people moving out to where you can't hire anyone, right? And so that might be more from a organization like a retail environment. Strategic risk, that's really what the council deals with all the time. Strategic risk is, do we want to build a new park? Do we want to have police operate? What do we want to do? You're talking at the high level, and so there's certain risks that are going to be with that as well. Partnerships, acquisitions, things like that might be that. Compliance risk, OSHA, EPA, reporting, all those type of things would fall under the compliance risk. And we talked about reputational risk as well. Damage to reputation can be a challenge there. All right, and the next one there. All right, so this is data. So we're going to actually go through some data. For on the screen in here, it might be a little bit smaller, but I'll tell you what's going on. So the dark green is those cities with law enforcement operations or public safety operations. And what this is showing, the number of injuries for every 100 full-time employees within the pool. And this is the entire CERA pool at this point. And then the light green is those cities with that don't have public safety. And part of the reason why we separate them out is, well, we do know that police operations and fire, they're more likely to get injured, just the nature of the work that they're performing, right? Dealing with combative suspects and those type of things, so we're expecting to see that. And then the red line is the trend line, that's the combined, what we've seen over the last basically about 7 years there. The reason I show this is to kind of show the power of what we've been doing is we work with our members to try to reduce workplace injuries, and we're seeing the results of that through our public safety forums and all that, and really making it top of mind for city staff. So like, what are you doing? How can we reduce someone from actually getting injured on the job? And so right now, I can't even see the numbers on my glasses on, but so overall, we're about 7.51 injuries for every 100 full-time employees for the entire pool. And that's about almost 10,000 employees probably. So that's pretty good. We average about 300 injuries a year approximately is what we typically see based upon that. And then we've seen law enforcement claims, those, everything's been going down. So we're going in the right direction with our programs. Now, the next one's going to be general liability data. This is the pool, and this is what we do look back is over the last 10 years. And again, this is all CERA members. This is our top 10 of what we see within CERA. I'm going to do dangerous conditions as number 1, and you see improper design as number 3 on there. Basically, both of those deal with roadways, but in a little different sense. Improper design is what someone is making a claim is that the roadway, the speed limit isn't appropriate, that the turn, the stop sign shouldn't be there, or there should be a stop sign. So they're basically arguing that the design has caused an injury to where they've gotten an accident. Most of these are related, almost all these are vehicle accidents. A dangerous condition is the stoplights stop working, or the timing, someone's arguing the timing was off on some of those different things. The column that you see on the total incurred column, $25 million is what we paid out, or 25 is the total incurred. We haven't paid, it's reserves, that's what, on some of these, we haven't closed them out yet, but that's what we're expecting to pay out total over this 10 years. The next one on there is excessive force, false arrest, civil rights. So those with law enforcement, number 2, we paid out about $19 million in those type of claims. So again, quite a bit of money on those. And Hemet just settled a $30 million law enforcement excessive force claim. They're not a member, they're not ours. But those are the types of things you might see there. Number 4, sidewalks. Overall, about $8 million in sidewalk claims throughout our membership. An average cost is about $20,000 is what it costs there. Now, sidewalks and EPL, employment practice and liability, the one thing I'd like to point out there is you have indemnity incurred column and you have legal incurred. Indemnity incurred, that's what we actually paid the claimant. So that's what the person that sued the city actually got money. Legal incurred was what we paid to defend the claim. For sidewalk and EPL, we spend more money defending the claims than we actually pay out. And that's just in EPL, just to defend an employment practices liability claim, on average, $250,000 just to defend it. We'll win, If we win, we're still paying $250, right? And then depending on the what the claim made, if we lose, potentially, then we also have to pay the defense costs for the claimant as well. And that can be in the millions in some cases. And then we're talking more about sidewalks here in a moment that goes to that. Vehicle collisions, 581, well, lots of claims. This is where our employees basically ran into someone else, or they ran into a building. They damaged property with the vehicle. And so that one, about $6 million, average payout's $10,000. A lot of these things, if you think, are preventable, right? Not having these type of claims, again, it's a fund for failure, that's what we look at. Sewer claims is on there as well. Okay, let's go, then the next slide. This is just the 6 members in Humboldt County. Just so, didn't want to show any individual members on this type of thing, but at least you get an idea. Those that are shaded still are the ones that were in the top 10. So that way you can kind of see where does your top 10 fall compared to others. So in this case, in Humboldt County, EPL claims are number 2. Right? So work practices, culture, basically employees are suing for retaliation, discrimination, those type of things. So that there's some work that we can do in that area. And a lot of that is making sure we're having a good relationship with our employees on that. Excessive force is number 3. What's interesting, sewer is number 4. So I can tell you, Eureka and Arcata, they know this. Up north in Fortuna, same thing. Old infrastructure, that we have sewer claims. This is similar to the Bay Area. Typically in a lot, we don't see sewer claims in Southern California with the infrastructure, but out here we typically do. Doesn't cost as much, but when they happen, but we do see those. Sidewalk claims is a little bit further down. And then down at the very bottom is road conditions. Basically, that means potholes, right? So when you have a pothole claim, and with all the rain, we've seen more of those type of pothole claims. All right, let's go to the next. Okay, and then municipal exposures. So we saw what some of those exposures are, right? Sidewalk, sewer, all those. So the liability exposures, go ahead and just start clicking on the next one here. Claims or lawsuits, actually go back up. Claims or lawsuits, third party, basically sustained injury, property damage. That's what we're gonna spend the most time talking about in the next, what I got left here? It's 30 minutes here. And the next one, we saw employment practices is the next one. So that's employee retaliation, hostile work environment, those type of things is the next one. Workers' comp, again, that's fairly straightforward. Training programs, making sure we're giving the right tools and equipment for employees. And the property exposures are really, when we talk about that, that's your own property being exposed to loss. What can we do to make sure we don't have those type of claims on there? Go ahead and roll this video. Yeah. Hopefully it works on this one.
I'm often asked by people, who is responsible for these accidents? Whom can I sue if I was injured? And the answer is there are 2 likely defendants. One, of course, is the person who left the debris, if we can locate that person. This might be someone who deliberately littered, someone who dumped their property on the roadway or highway, or a truck whose load became loose and fell out. Oftentimes, these trucks and vans fail to secure their loads adequately, making them especially negligent. The second common party to sue in these cases is the local government. Cities have a responsibility to clean up hazardous road debris and to make the roadways safe for motorists. Cities are especially liable if they were notified of items in the roadways, but failed to clean it up in a timely manner. The good news is that commercial trucks and cities tend to be deep pockets, and we're often able to collect big settlements in these cases.
Okay. So these are videos you can find on the internet. The main thing I just want to hear, cities are deep pockets,
Yeah.
right? And that's the view is, oh, if something happens, we can do that. Now, here's the reason why is what's called joint and several liability. Has anyone heard the term joint and several liability before?
I have.
So talk to your legislator, you've heard it today. This is the thing we really need from a tort reform standpoint in California. So joint liability, all parties are liable for the full amount of damages, right, when they're involved. Several liabilities, parties are only liable for the proportionate negligence. But under joint liability, if other parties cannot pay, one party is responsible for paying all of the economic damages. Okay, so what does that mean? Goes back to the road issue. Let's say and we've had cases where, actually I'll use a drunk driver. We had a drunk driver that runs a red light intersection, they're drunk, they're 0.2, right? Way over the legal limit. And they'd have a head-on collision and kill the other party. The family sues, they sue the other party, and they sue the city. And why are they suing the city? Because of this. Because if let's say they have minimum coverage and they have $50,000 coverage per occurrence, the insurance company for the at-fault driver is gonna write a check and go, we're out, here's your $50,000. Goes to a jury and they decide $1 million that needs to get paid out. Well, they've already paid their money, and all they have to prove is that the city was 1% liable. Okay? So now juries tend to think, okay, 1% of $1 million, that's $10,000, so that's all the city would have to pay. Not the way this works, right? And we can't, unfortunately, under the law, the attorneys can't tell them that that's not the way it works, that if you find 1%, the city has to pay the entire balance of basically $975,000, right? And so this is what happens with these big lawsuits is, yeah, there might be one party that's at fault, but then if it's $10 million judgment, right, the city is the one paying the balance of that. That's what's happening with these nuclear verdicts, okay? Here's a couple of awards. Some of these are older. This one actually happened in Eureka back in 2011. This had to do with a Caltrans. It was on Highway 101. And Caltrans, in this case, they told them to move a bucket truck that was actually protecting the employee, and then ended up, unfortunately, that employee was killed in there. $56 million award. The employee was paralyzed due to the accident. Camping trip, 47.5. Again, these are older claims, 2012. I'll get to some more recent ones here. This is paralyzed PCH. Basically, people were jogging along Pacific Coast Highway. You had a drunk driver, 3 previous convictions, all this other stuff. But what the problem was when they did the traffic control, that looks like, instead of a bike lane, that looks like another lane. And so that was the argument, that the guy was driving in the other lane, and because it was, the traffic control wasn't set up appropriately through standards, and basically a $50 million payout for that. Yeah, go ahead and show this one. This is, and then the car in the middle, right there is what you want to watch.
Oh, God.
Okay, I'm doing. This is one of our members, City of Highland. Actually, this is one of their roads. What they argued was this was an improper design of the roadway. They argued that the speed limit should have been lower, different things, whatever. We prevailed on design immunity. So this is one of those where the defense actually won. And the reason, in this case, the one person was speeding way past, and it wouldn't matter what speed limit you had posted, they were driving too fast on that area. But so what they'll try, there's certain defenses, we'll talk more about design immunity and what that means, because we can protect against those type of things if the council approved plans and we have a traffic engineer and so on. So the main area where we typically see claims is what's called dangerous condition of public property. And within the government code, there's a specific reference to this condition. So it's a condition that creates, and this is actual language from government code, a condition of property that creates a substantial, actually has parentheses, as distinguished from minor, trivial, or insignificant risk of injury when such property or adjacent property is used with due care in a manner in which it is reasonably foreseeable to be used. Okay. So when it comes to sidewalks, the issue is a sidewalk, is it, how big is the uplift, right? And so they've actually defined in case law, a trivial defect, an actual term, trivial defect, originally was 3/4 of an inch. Judgment occurred about 5 years ago in a Temecula case that they got increased to 1.5 inches. It's a pretty good increase to have on there. It's been slightly kind of batted back down, probably closer to 1 inch. There's issues of shading and jagged edges and those type of things. But the idea here, as long as it's intended use, right? If someone did the site, your people expect to walk on it, that's its intended use, and they trip and fall, and it is a substantial, right, risk of injury because of that, now we basically have a potential claim. It's considered to be a dangerous condition. So then the next issue is, when did we know about it and all those type of things? Actually, this is another slide. Basically, no, you're fine. Go in the last one. Actually, you're good. go back to the, there you go. Who do you sue? Everyone. This is, again, plaintiff's attorneys. Who do you sue? Everyone. The trip and fall occurs as a result of tree root problems. It also talks about look to city ordinance to see whether it has a clear and unambiguous language making the homeowner liable for the injuries. Why did they mention that? Is because there's been a test case, San Jose was a test case back in 2006 approximately, where they have language, and it's about 70% of our members have adopted language that transfers liability to the adjacent property owner. Okay, why do I bring this up? Under Streets and Highways Code 5610, there's already a requirement that property owners are required to maintain their sidewalks. It's been there since 1911, right? They're required to maintain, and actually provides in their language that if they don't maintain it, the city can repair it and put a lien on their home for the cost of the repairs, right? Most cities don't do it, right? They don't want, whether they don't know about it, Public Works, whatever, but that is a requirement, they have to maintain it. If they don't maintain it, and someone gets injured, unfortunately, then the city is liable for any injuries that occur on the sidewalk in front of their property, right? So if they notice and you gave them notice, they don't fix it, the city's responsible. So that's why these ordinances have come into play that basically say, yeah, you're responsible to maintain it, and if you don't, you're gonna be held liable. So what's the effect of doing that? Basically, we can tender claims, like the article said, to the adjacent property owner, and their homeowner's insurance will basically pay the claim. It's considered part of that, that's what normally happens. Now, it doesn't completely absolve the city from having a claim. If it was a street tree or some type of thing that caused the uplift on there, and then maybe the city pays half, but it does reduce, that helps mitigate the cost of those type of claims to the city. Passing a sidewalk liability ordinance is a political issue, right? Councils are, you know, the reason why I've actually been to council meetings where they say, we're not gonna, I'm up for election next year. We can't pass it, you know, because they're worried about that. But when you're paying, you know, if you have lots of claims and those type of things, you know, why should, the take on this, when I went to another council meeting where it passed and the public was supportive of it, because the way we present it is when someone trips and falls, all you taxpayers are now paying for that trip and fall. So wouldn't it make more sense that that person that caused it, actually they pay for the claim rather than everyone else in the community? So that's the argument of why you'd want to have an ordinance online. Okay. This is the most recent one. This is City of Davis. The uplift was, I think, a little bit over an inch. They paid $18 million. The lady tripped and fell, hit her head, traumatic brain injury, right? So this is November of 2025 when this was issued. Davis had a really bad year because about 2 months earlier, they also got report they had a tree fall in the park on, I think it was a lady who died. That was a $22 million. So in the course of a year, $40 million worth of payments were made on behalf of the city, the Davis. All right, so this goes back to the question that was asked from Arcata of what should we be doing there? So the first one, if someone sues the city, right, they put a complaint in, they have government code, they can do that. And again, most of the times, the city council, when they come to you, you're gonna reject the claim or deny the claim because they have to prove negligence if we don't see that the city had notice. So the first couple three on here, go ahead and you can do all of them on there. The public entity owned or controlled the property at the time of the injury, okay? So is that a city sidewalk, right? Okay, that's what it sounded like, so the city owned it. The public property was in a dangerous condition at the time of injury. Again, we had the definition of dangerous condition. It's not trivial, more than an inch, something like that. So it's a dangerous condition. And the kind of injury that occurred was reasonable, foreseeable as a consequence, that someone tripped, right? So and they broke an ankle, whatever. Those three criteria almost always met in a sidewalk trip and fall claim. It's the next two that are the ones of why claims get denied and why we typically fight the claims. So it's either the dangerous condition was created by a public employee's negligent or wrongful act or omission within the scope of their employment. I'll use the example of traffic control. They said traffic control, they did it wrong, they were negligent in the way, the design of the traffic control. That would be an act of the employee. Sidewalk is typically going to be more like this next one. The public entity had actual or constructive notice of the condition a sufficient time before the injury occurred to have taken reasonable measures to protect against the injury. You think about all the sidewalks in the city and how reasonable is it you're going to identify every single sidewalk that has an issue? how often, and it takes a long time, and, you're not going out there with the tape measures, okay, is this 3/4 of an inch or is this an inch, right? Can you eyeball those type of things? But, basically, as the council member noted, they alerted the Public Works Department, said, hey, we got an issue. And let's say a month goes by, they didn't fix it, someone trips and falls, the city's gonna own that claim, because they now have notice of the issue. I can say, I was at Arcata this morning, along near the council chambers or the city hall, and you can see where the city's ground down, you can see where they've done a lot of grinding and reduced that, so they are paying attention to those things. And the areas you want to focus on, especially from a public entity, your parks, those areas that are high traffic areas, your schools, senior centers, those type of things are the areas you want to make sure your staff is focusing on, because they're more likely to see a claim, especially senior centers, people shuffling their feet, those type of things, or kids running on those type of things. So the key determinant is notice when it comes to that. That's the same thing for potholes. The reason why we deny pothole claims is pothole claims, all of a sudden the pothole just appeared. When did we get notice and people popped my tire, bent my rim? Okay, well, we didn't know about it. And after the storms, there's tons of potholes. So almost all the claims for potholes almost always denied because it becomes a notice issue. Most of our cities are really good. Once they notice, they're going to go fill in patch as quickly as possible to take care of those situations. So how do we prevent some of the losses on trip and falls? Regular inspections and maintenance. So under the code, it basically says you have to have a reasonable program of inspection, is basically the words on it. Does that mean once a month? No. It means you can do a section of your sidewalks once every if you have quadrants, break it up. We're gonna do a quadrant every year, right? Because sidewalks are gonna take a long time to raise, so over that period of time, you keep on rotating, or maybe it's, you do 3 a year. You can, again, adopt an ordinance, manage the risk, the maintenance and liability, and again, investigate the claims. And this is where we do a lot of training with city staff on, is if they do get a claim, take pictures, do measurements, show what the measurements are. Don't just go out there and fix it, because if we do get a claim, now we have no defense to say, it was only this much, right? To be able to defend the claim when it does come with it. Because we will also argue, maybe we didn't have notice, but we can also argue it was a trivial defect, in which we win on a lot of cases too. Basically saying, it's a half inch, the judge will throw it out, because it's not that high. Trees, so falling trees can be a claim. Eureka, a couple of years ago, had a claim near their zoo. I know it made the press up here, where a child was severely injured, traumatic brain injury. In this case, it wasn't actually a city tree, it was part of the natural area. But in that case, a settlement was actually reached, because you don't want to put a 4-year-old on a stand or whatever. They're going to have been obviously very sympathetic, and we would have lost. There's no point in doing that. Roadway hazards, inspection, maintenance, document complaints. So when it comes to roadway or design issues, the way that works, because you guys don't have any no stoplights, it's all stop signs and all that, right? You have a traffic engineer that says what your speed limit should be, where you need to have stop signs or other type of things, and usually there's a warrant that's issued based upon the traffic study that says this is what you need to have that. Within attorneys know if there is a major accident or incident, there's what's called SWITRs, statewide incident reporting. Anyways, basically CHP maintains a database of every single accident in the state of California, the intersection, how often it's occurred, all that type of stuff. So what happens is when you have an accident that occurs at the location, if it happens so many times, the city, you have notice that's a situation you need to correct, and that's what they'll argue is the notice argument is you've had 5 of these instances in the last year, something happened, so you need to do something, change the speed limit, do stuff like that. Is there another question, or is that the same?
I'm not sure.
Okay. We'll
Alex, do you have a question?
Okay.
Okay.
So I got 6 minutes. The other losses, auto accidents, again, we see lots of those. The biggest thing we encourage is Employee poll notice program, and make sure all employees, their driving records are being reviewed. Are they eligible to drive? Defensive driver training, and just staying on top of those. Again, that's something that's usually quite preventable. And make sure they're not distracted using cell phones while they're driving, stuff like that. Parks and Rec. So this is the big one. Obviously, the city had a claim a couple of years ago. It's still ongoing in this area, but basically waivers. That's your biggest defense, is going to be having waivers, as well as risk transfer, meaning having them purchase insurance. That will basically eliminate the risk to the organization. But those waivers need to be specific to the risk on there. And unfortunately, the one claim, the one person didn't sign the waiver, and so that's why, otherwise this would have been a closed claim a long time ago on that. Again, inspection facilities. Okay, some of the immunities, there's lots of immunities, but design immunity is one of the big ones. There's also trail immunity, because I know you have lots of walking trails. If someone says, oh, I tripped and fall on the trail, there's trail immunity. It's a natural state. They can't sue you over basically the trail not being maintained. It's a trail, right? Even paved trails, technically, there's a design immunity for that as well. Not having regulatory traffic signs. The basis of not having a sign is not the basis of that either. Lighting, right? If someone trips and falls and it's dark on the sidewalk and they go, oh, you didn't have lights. Can't sue you for that. Darkness is a natural condition, right? Now, you install lights and the light breaks, and you maintain it, now you can get sued because you didn't maintain the light, right? So there's nuances there with that. Again, reasonable inspection, we kind of talked about, have a system of reasonable inspection. Design immunity, this is probably the big one for council. If you start getting things brought to you for approval of design, in order to get design immunity, you actually have to have, let's say traffic engineer sign off or an architect sign off on the design. So I'll use, the bike park as an example. One of the areas you want to make sure is that design approved, and then also who designed it, any type of sign off, and who has to, the approval of the design would be the council, who has the authority. So within basically government code, under design immunity, you have the authority, or you can delegate the authority to the city manager, public works director, superintendent, to also have that authority as well. That way you're not getting inundated with plan changes and stuff. But design immunity is really big when it comes to what you're doing. And because we can basically get things thrown out saying it was a good design, you can't sue us, and the council approved it, it was reasonable, move on, okay? Okay, and then loss of design immunity where entities lose it is because of changing conditions. With that, typically on a roadway, that would mean a school got built, and then all of a sudden you have 5,000 more cars going. Well, that changed the flow of traffic, and therefore you'd have to do another traffic study, say, yes, it's still safe based upon the speed limits, what things do you need to change on there? And that's where the loss of design immunity would come into play. Again, reasonable inspections, as long as you're doing reasonable inspections, you're covered there. Employment, we've kind of talked quite a bit about that. The main thing, the big issue is hostile work environment. Making sure having good policies, your personnel manual is really key when it comes to that, and making sure that all the employees, the employee handbook, what's the rules, right? If you don't have the rules in place, that gives an avenue for them to basically sue because, there wasn't a rule against that, right? Or investigations, how those are going to be done. And then property losses, updated schedules, like the property schedule, understand what's covered, and having good housekeeping there. I think this one I just tried to keep simple. Just go ahead and I'll go to the one, keep going. Okay. This is the main takeaway on this part, and I'll leave it at that because city staff, I've reviewed a lot of this. When we have indemnification agreements, there's two parts of an agreement that we really focus on, and where insurance and indemnification come into play. Indemnity and hold harmless agreement, that's the legal transfer of risk. That's why we focus the attorneys on making sure you have that language in there. And so almost the language, everyone has a little preferred, but this is the standard. Contractor shall hold harmless, defend, indemnify the city, its officers, blah, blah, blah. Right? That word defend is really key in there because defense is a separate duty with an insurance policy. And so if you don't require them to defend, that means they don't have to hire an attorney. They don't have to actually defend you unless you say defend. So we always want to make sure that word is in there. Insurance is the funding mechanism for the indemnification. That finances that money. We've had cases where someone signs an indemnity agreement saying they're gonna hold harmless, defend, all that, and then they don't have insurance. What happens? Go after them personally. Right? Then their house, all those, it's what assets do they have? Insurance, we're trying to do them a favor by having insurance. Because sometimes they get, well, they don't have enough coverage, well, they're a small business, they need to have insurance. There's a reason, otherwise they're gonna lose their own assets if they don't. So there's a reason for those type of things. And I think the next one, I tried to cut this one down. Okay, keep going. Okay, yeah, this one. Okay, keep going, fill that. Within an insurance policy, there's two types of things here. The top part is the indemnification. The public entity has a hold harmless agreement, the indemnification with the contractor. The contractor has a relationship with the insured, and then that's called an insured contract that actually has meaning with the insurance policy. So we can get coverage through the indemnification language. But what we prefer is the bottom one, which is an additional insured endorsement, where we get endorsed as an additional insured. That means we have a direct relationship with the insurance company. So the city, when you get additional insured endorsement, we can file a claim with the insurance company as if we were a contractor and say, look, we're additional insured, defend us as required under there. So this is a belt and suspenders approach. We want both to make sure that we get the coverage for those type of claims. And with that, I think I'm gonna, again, this is more detailed. You have the backup. It has in here, but I think I thought I cut more of this out. But, no, that's fine. We're just gonna go into that. The main point on this is that the contracts that you have protect the city. And the indemnification and the endorsements, when we look at that, primary, non-contributory, all this stuff, the goal is to transfer risk to the party that actually causes the claim. And so if you get pushback, or someone comes to council and says, but we can't afford the insurance, right? And usually we're only still asking for $1 million. It's not that much. We also, there's a program under special events called TULIP, tenant user, and there's a other program. But basically, they can, if someone doesn't have the proper coverage, they can purchase coverage through the special events program to get coverage to basically for the contract they have with the city at a lower cost. So if it's something it's a one-off type of project, they can get insurance that they may not really have that will meet the city's insurance requirements that we'd want to see there. So I know I went a little bit over time, but I wanted to, it wasn't 3 hours, luckily for them. They had to sit through 3 hours of this, but try to cover like the big meaty parts and what, with that. So happy to answer any final questions, and offline, happy to call, email, by all means.
Thank you, and we weren't trying to rush you, just.
No.
No.
Kat, do you have any questions? Actually, let me go the other way. Terry, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Elise?
It was
I have a
informative.
Couple questions. So when you said TULIP, so that is Sierra providing a means for people renting facilities to get insurance?
It's actually through our broker, Alliance, and TULIP is tenant, user, landlord, and an instructor. So also if you have people teaching classes, they can also get coverage through it as well. But yeah, it's a separate program we can hook up the city with.
And then I was just curious, are sidewalks typically existing in the right of way or on the property owned by the adjacent home?
So typically sidewalks at some point, the way it works is technically it's the city's right of way, right? Goes from the middle of the street and it usually goes to wherever the property line is. And a lot of times, most of the time, the sidewalks is considered the city's right of way. But because the Streets and Highways Code, even though that's city right of way, the sidewalk still needs to be maintained by the property owner, even though technically it's within the city's right of way. It's not their property. Hopefully that explains it. I think that's the question you're asking, right?
Yeah.
With sidewalks being a liability, is it better not to have sidewalks if you have a choice?
So there is no requirement to have sidewalks.
Okay.
Right? And when you have new developments and those type of things, usually the developers, they have a certain time period that to have protect, insure against the city products completed operations. But, from a sidewalk standpoint, from a walkable city for ADA, those type of things, most cities are going to want to have sidewalks. But we have a lot of members where they have dirt roads, in a lot of places they're not maintained and that type of stuff. And there's no requirement for those type of things.
With the new obstruction design to slow down traffic, bulb outs and such, is it better to do that to slow down traffic for liability purposes, or better not to do that? Because sometimes it feels like, you know, they're obstructing the flow of traffic, and then it feels like it's causing more issues.
So what I'll refer to is your traffic engineer, that's what they specialize in. And based upon, what do you call it, manual and uniform traffic control devices, they have a whole criteria of what they use, what the basis of design should be. And I would lean on them as them being the experts. If they say this is, you know, from a liability is not going to change one way or the other.
Okay.
As long as the plans are approved, it was a reasonable design, there's no difference in liability. Now, from a citizen perspective of flow, hey, we'd rather not have these and those type of things, then that becomes more of, okay, can we take them out and still have design? You can, but then the traffic engineer is saying, okay, this is how we make sure it's still safe. Reduce the speed, do those type of things.
Last question, are council members at all responsible for reporting stuff they see out in the public? Such as sidewalks and or someone riding on the bike park?
So, they're not required. That's probably a good idea because, you know, if you do know. But you actually reminded me of the other point that I made in the other one. I forgot, I didn't put it in this one. One of the things you want to be careful of in council meetings and, you know, other committees that people may serve on is to go in a public meeting and saying, this is a dangerous condition, this is unsafe, and da, da, da. Plaintiff's attorneys will basically, with AI, can go through your minutes and say, oh, John said, you know, it's a dangerous condition in a public meeting, therefore, we're gonna write a check, right? Because of that. So that's one thing you wanna be careful of.
Okay.
But so in a public meeting, I would probably not definitely do that because it opened it up. But I would talk to staff and say, hey, I noticed this is what's going on, and then make sure that they fix it because you did let them know, and especially if there's an email that says, hey, so-and-so, this is a problem, I took a picture, I sent it in. It's one of the arguments or the questions we get is it better that we not know about stuff? And I can tell you that the defense attorneys I talk to, they say no. That's like the ostrich approach, stick your head in the sand and, you know, hope for the best. They would much rather know about these things. And if it may take, and this is the thing we talked actually quite a bit about today, it's better to know, and maybe we can't fix all the things, but if you have a priority plan saying, look, we're fixing the high priority, and this one's number 5 on the list. We don't have enough money to get these things. It's just like ADA, transition plans. You can have a transition plan for 30 years. If you show evidence that you're in the process of doing it and you're funding as you can, you'll be okay from a liability standpoint because you're doing what you can. Now, in the meantime, what I would say, maybe we don't, on that sidewalk, we're not gonna patch and repair it. Maybe we can't grind it right away. So all they need to do is paint it. You provided notice, now if someone trips and falls, it's like, how did you not notice? We put a warning orange paint. That is enough to provide notice to protect the city from liability.
One more follow-up question.
Yep, no
Hypothetically, if somebody came to me and they had a concern about something, and I failed to relay that information to city staff, would I be at all responsible for reporting?
No, I mean, not personally or anything else. I mean, I think the expectation, you know, if the thing is yes, why you may have had notice, but it didn't get relayed, those type of things, it would be much harder, especially if someone, I mean, if it was an email and writing, they said this is a specific thing, and that's kind of different. But if someone talking to you in the grocery store saying, hey, you really should look at blah, 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 and our world, we're so busy with everything else, and you forgot? No.
Great. Thank you.
I know that you're probably done with sidewalks, but I'm not. I still have a little bit of confusion about the ordinance to adopt to transfer the liability to the property owner if there's a sidewalk failure or something wrong with in front of a private property. So I need some clarification about that piece, like yes, it's property owner's responsibility, but who would be liable unless we did this ordinance. Also, a question about if you have a property but you don't have a sidewalk, but maybe, you know, there's sidewalk and then there's no sidewalk and then your property has no sidewalk, are you responsible to maintain that where like there would be a sidewalk, I guess? Yep. Okay.
Yep.
So back to the question, sorry to keep asking
Yeah.
the same thing, but the ordinance to adopt for transfer of liability to the property owner. I guess I need to know more about that.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I've actually got, probably the thing that might be more succinct, the League of Cities actually has a white paper on this very topic.
Okay.
And they basically encourage municipalities to basically pass an ordinance. And they discuss the San Jose case, they kind of go through it, about 20 pages worth, but it's gonna be more specific and kind of highlight kind of some of the nuances
Okay.
of what that one's, yeah. So I'll send that to Jenny.
I'm also pretty sure we already have one.
Oh, we
On
do?
my list from this morning is to find it and make sure that it's current.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll do that, and then we also have model language, we have a whole like workbook kind of thing that can, if you don't have it, here's some language you can use that's model language that others have adopted, even sample letters if you send to say, hey, you need to fix it. And some cities have done where they do a matching, or they do interest-free loan, right? The city will do it, and then they just need to pay it over a period of time. So there's different ways you can accomplish to help them get the sidewalk to where it needs to be, so that they don't have the liability if something does happen. Because the issue is, really, if the sidewalk's in poor condition, they still have, right now, they have an obligation to fix it, regardless of anything the city does. Just whether they get the city sent up a notice, that's the issue.
So my understanding is for our city, one of the things that we do is we do not require an encroachment permit for them to do the work on the sidewalk, which after this morning concerns me some about the transfer of liability to them.
Yep.
So I'd like to look at
Yeah.
like what our options are with
Yeah.
that.
No, I would require an encroachment permit because of that. And because if they do work and they damage that and then someone does trip and fall, whoever caused that, the contractor, the plumber, whatever, that, they should own that, and that shouldn't be the city's responsibility if something happens. Yeah.
Councilmember Napier?
Thank you.
Okay,
Can, yeah, I was gonna say.
sure, yes.
Since we're in the middle of our bike park project, and there's been lots of discussion about why can't we ride on the bike park? It's there, it's paved, it looks like a bike park, why can't we use it like a bike park? So my understanding is that it's not currently insurable because it wasn't engineered in its current state or ever stamped by an engineer. So can you clarify that?
Yeah, so what I would say is, it is insurable. So here's the thing, we don't, as Sierra, we don't initially say, this is insurable, it's your operation, what you end up doing. You would have deductible and all that. If we saw claims coming from it, then we might say, okay, we're gonna exclude coverage because of, specifically just for that. But there are things that you can do, and we have lots of places that have bike parks or pump tracks and things like that, to where you have signage, notice, all those type of things. It's a high-risk activity that you essentially help mitigate some of the risk there. As far as the design itself, what you would want to do is have an engineer take a look at it, and there are companies that design specifically pump tracks, and they can say, okay, what fixes do you need? Because ultimately what it comes down to, if it was just willy-nilly, okay, let's put a hill there and do all that type of stuff, you do want to make sure, okay, the flow and how fast people are going and all that, there should be some design elements as part of that. So after the fact, they could bring it up. You may not have design immunity per se because it's already done, but that would necessarily give you the protection if you fix the stuff that was there, or if the engineer comes out and says, no, you're fine, this is all okay. Again, you don't have design immunity, but that is also considered a hazardous activity, pump track. You have immunities for hazardous activities, so riding bikes and doing stuff like that. Skateboard parks, that's a hazardous activity as well. You have immunities for those type of activities. So there is some protections you do have. But we would certainly help with signage and say, here's what you need to do. And we can help. I know some different companies that might be able to help out and say, okay, engineer, at least, the issue is whether they're gonna feel comfortable probably putting the signature saying, yes, this is fine. That's where you may have some folks, if I didn't really get a close look, I can see most of the stuff was covered and all those type of stuff. But what you've done now, until that point of having the sign saying do not enter, that's good. That's gonna protect you.
And then once it's opened, we are not planning to have waivers, signed waivers.
You don't need waivers.
You don't need that.
No, so, and this goes back to signage. So skateboard parks, as an example, there's specific code that says, and again, this is specific to skateboards, you have an ordinance that says you're required to wear helmet, knee pads, all that kind of stuff. And as long as you have that, the state of California says you have immunity from any lawsuits if someone gets injured by posting the sign and having an ordinance language, right? The same kind of thing occurs as long as you have a sign that's visible at the entry points, right? So maybe you have multiple entry points, or you have a fence that says, this is how people enter, and you say, here's what the safety rules are, here's all those things, bike at your own risk, we're not responsible. You gave notice, and that is good, it's not as good as a waiver, but it's pretty darn close, because you basically said, here's what the concerns are, and you need to be aware of what the risks are. They're assuming the risk when they do that. Example, when you go to Disneyland, they don't have you sign a waiver. But there's a big sign that no one ever reads right at the entrance gate that says you assume risk, and then on each ride they tell you if you have a heart condition, all those type of things, do not go on this ride. They've done what's required. They gave notice. That's the same thing you're going to do.
Can we do the same thing for the skating rink or not? The sign.
So skating rink is, I would say, is a little bit different. You do have signage there, but it's also a controlled environment where you actually have people pay.
Okay.
And so it makes more sense to do the waivers and have that there. Whereas if it's just an open, you're not going to have people there, and you're not having to pay and all that type of stuff, then a notice type thing is sufficient.
Great.
But other places, yeah, but I would still continue the waivers for that.
Any remote
I just wanted to ask a follow-up question to yours about placing things in the road to try to slow people down. My understanding from what you said this morning is that those need to be stamped by an engineer and come before council before they're installed anywhere in the city roads.
You should. The traffic engineer should sign off on any type of road improvements because the whole point is, what are you trying to accomplish with that? You're trying to slow traffic, you're trying to do whatever, and could that be done with those or speed? There's other, that's why they do the roundabouts. All these things are trying to slow traffic, and they're using different tools in their toolbox to do it.
Can I piggyback on that?
Sure.
I don't know if you've seen, but I think in our ordinance, or maybe it was even in the general manager contract, that it gave the city manager the authority to establish stop signs and I think one-way streets. And yet they don't have any formalized training in traffic engineering, so I was wondering if that is something that we should revisit.
I would probably say for the city's purposes, to authorize. So I think the idea of kind of interpreting this is so it doesn't have to go to council to say, we need a stop sign. But depending on where things are at, to still have a traffic engineer. All the studies of when you install traffic control devices, those type of things, really a traffic engineer should be the one that says, okay, yes, this is what your roads, the flow, the traffic, the speed, all those things should be looked at as part of that. Stop signs are probably less of an issue than because you're actually stopping traffic, right? The only issue would be is if somehow because you stopped it on one side and not on the other, to where it creates a condition where people don't know what they're supposed to do. That might be some of the issues there, but for the most part, I'd see less issues with stop signs, but best practice, really have a traffic engineer saying, here's what you should have for your roadways.
Any remote questions? Seeing none? Public comment? None? All right.
I have a question about reporting some of those potentially dangerous conditions. Do you guys have a report form, like a template? Is that something we should make in-house? I'm just trying to think of a way to best track those if they do come in.
You got a great tool. Okay, simple but needed is one of the things we talked about a little bit.
I don't have a computer, I didn't know what it was for, but.
Okay, so simple but needed is it's a platform. It's used a lot of times for checklists, like for inspecting playground. We have preset checklists. And as part of that, it actually has kind of a cradle to grave process that once an incident report, you can take a picture and then you can follow up to make sure, okay, what was the mitigation that we did to close it out? So it's like a ticket saying, okay, we opened the ticket, we have this issue, and then we're gonna close it out. They've also added a little thing to where people don't have to download the app, and this could be even for citizens to report. See Click Fix? We've seen it, which costs way too much money for what it is. But essentially, you can have it to where it's like a QR code or even a link on the city's website to where they can report an incident, they can take a picture, it'll actually timestamp when the picture was taken. It'll even do the, trying to think, the metadata that shows like the location, the GPS coordinates, so you know exactly. And you can actually have citizens do the same thing, or you can just have it internally for staff to say, hey, we see something, click it, so when, or anyone, right? And then it would go, you can have a central mailbox where it goes to, and then you would have a dashboard, you can all see the open tickets and basically say, okay, high priority, low priority, which ones are closed. And that way you have more control over those type of situations. Because the biggest issue that I see in almost every city is people report stuff and then it doesn't get closed, right? And so having that process to make sure things get closed is really big.
Does that software have a way of consolidating? Like, you know, say 10 people put in a.
Oh, for the same
For
problem.
the same thing?
Problem, the same
No, not necessarily, but you could,
route coming out of a.
I think, but you can do
Sidewalk.
something to where you can probably just say, you know, reference whatever ticket or something like that.
Cool.
Is that a free solution you guys
Free.
offer? Okay, great.
We're all about, I mean, so everything I've talked about for the most part is we've included as part of the services that we provide. And so we purchase on behalf of the members, and so we make it available. So, again, try to make it turnkey. It's fairly turnkey. We can, Thor can probably reach out to you. I think, Ryan, how much, because you don't do work much with Simple Needed.
I'm due for a refresh.
Okay,
but
so,
I've used it.
but then he can learn it more, and then he can come back and get you. But yeah, we'll make sure we get you, up to speed on it.
Nice. Last call for questions? Seeing none? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric.
Do we have another, is there another, are you presenting too, or?
Oh, no, I'm just.
They're just together.
Okay, great. Do we want to go ahead and adjourn? Sounds great. We're adjourned. Thank you.
7:50.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
I don't need